From censored files to clear evidence, this is Redacted Realms.
1. The truth about humans being able to hibernate? Can humans be revived? 2. When mentioning hibernation, what image immediately comes? 3. Lazy bears in caves avoiding the bitter cold of winter? 4. Hedgehogs curled up, bats hanging upside down? 5. Or even images like this? 6. Humans being hibernated in cocoons? 7. Surely you've seen plenty of this in science fiction movies, right? 8. So, can humans truly hibernate artificially like in the movies? 9. And if hibernation becomes a reality, what methods could humans use? 10. Let's explore this with Dead. 11. To decode this question, we should first understand the mechanism of hibernation. 12. So, what is hibernation? 13. It is a solution that helps some animal species overcome harsh weather. 14. As well as food scarcity. 15. The reason is that when winter comes, plants are no longer lush, and fruits become scarce. 16. Herbivorous animals are forced to find ways to survive under such harsh conditions. 17. Besides avoiding the cold and conserving energy. 18. Hibernation also helps these animals avoid being preyed upon by predators. 19. The common point among these animals is that they all have a fairly thick layer of white fat on the outside. 20. To limit water evaporation. 21. Around their shoulder and neck bones, there is also a layer of brown. 22. Capable of blocking heat 20 times more effective. 23. Therefore, these animals do not freeze to death during hibernation. 24. So, a question arises. Can humans do the same to conserve energy? 25. Unfortunately, we can realize on our own that. 26. Just sleeping over 12 hours makes us unable to sleep more, let alone for 3 months of winter. 27. The hibernation process doesn't only occur in a few species like polar bears, snakes, and bats as mentioned above. 28. But also in many other animals like frogs and mice, and it has lasted for millions of years. 29. However, the human body has evolved and become different, no longer having such a function. 30. Especially at this location. 31. The heart is the organ responsible for pumping blood throughout the body. So, 32. The hearts of animals can pump blood even when the temperature drops to minus 12 degrees Celsius. 33. But the human heart, when encountering low temperatures, can experience cardiac arrest. T function, it. 35. Humans being able to hibernate is truly an 36. However, there are still exceptions, like the story in the Rokko Mountains in western Japan. 37. A young man named Mitsutaka Uchikoshi, 35 years old, after a farewell party with colleagues. 38. Didn't return with friends by cable car but decided to walk down the mountain. 39. On the way, he got lost, slipped, and fell into a stream. 40. As a result, Uchikoshi fell and fractured his pelvis, unable to move. 41. And couldn't speak, the man fainted. 42. He recounted, on the second day when it got dark, I just lay there and suddenly felt very comfortable. 43. That was my last memory. Right after, I fell asleep. 44. No food, no water, completely helpless against the freezing weather. 45. 24 days later, he was accidentally discovered by a mountain climber and immediately. 46. At that time, Mr. Uchikoshi's body temperature had dropped only 22 degrees. 47. His pulse was almost undetectable. He had multiple organ failures. 48. The doctors were extremely surprised to conclude that he had fallen into a state similar to 49. And many vital organs in his body slowed down, but his brain was still protected. 50. I believe his brain capacity recovered 100% after this. And they also couldn't believe why Uchikoshi survived extraordinarily during his metabolism nearly stopping. Not only that, after 50 days, he was discharged from the hospital with a body free of lasting injuries. Although he entered the hospital in a near-death condition and specialists considered it an impossibility. A person can be deeply hypothermic and survive for a moderate period of time. These things sound like a completely extraordinary case. I've never heard of a similar case. Not only in this case but another similar case also occurred in 2001 in Canada. The 13-month-old baby girl Erica Nopai suddenly quietly left the sleeping forest due to the family forgetting to close the door. At that time, the weather was as cold as minus 20 degrees Celsius. The next morning, a horrified mother discovered Erica curled up in the ice, wearing only a thin diaper. Fear and worry surged when she realized her child's body was almost frozen solid. Immediately, she called an ambulance. Upon arrival, medical staff discovered Erica was mistaken. Her body frozen with a body temperature of only 60 degrees Celsius. Her heart had stopped beating for about 2 hours, and her mouth was so stiff that doctors couldn't insert a breathing tube. Not long after, she opened her eyes and let out her first cry since being frozen. But the question posed here is, what helped these two people have such intense vitality? Going back to 1940, when Russian scientists announced a shocking experiment. They found several dog heads after being severed, still living for a few hours. The astonishing thing was these heads could wag their ears upon hearing sounds and even lick their mouths. This research group claimed they could maintain the life of these dogs with an artificial blood circulation system. And they named this experiment the ghost dog experiment. A few decades later, in 2005, in the United States, scientists continued to conduct a similar experiment. They published the results in the Yearbook of Intensive Care and Emergency Medicine from experts at the University of Pittsburgh. In this experiment, they drained all the blood from the dogs' bodies and replaced it with a cold saline solution, providing nutrients and oxygen. When there was no blood left, their hearts stopped beating and their brains also ceased activity. After 3 hours, they proceeded to remove the cold saline solution and transfuse warm blood back. Then applied heat to. The result was that most of the dogs revived without significant brain damage. That is truly a mysterious and evocative story about the power of science and medicine in reviving life. Although the experiment was inhumane, it was also thanks to that humans who developed the hypothermia method, saving billions of people over the past decades. So what is this method like? Suffering an extremely large injury from an accident, a stab, or even a bullet can cause your circulation to stop. At that point, cells quickly become necrotic, especially brain cells. Originating from the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Dr. Shamuel Tischerman researched and named this technique emergency preservation and resuscitation, EPR. As in the case mentioned above, when in a state of blood loss, doctors are forced to perform emergency surgery within minutes and the patient has less than a 5% chance of survival. Very few, right? Many serious trauma surgeries fail due to time pressure on doctors, and not entirely due to the danger of the wound. That's because just 5 minutes of oxygen deprivation is enough for cells to be immediately destroyed. With the method of lowering body temperature significantly, the brain and cells almost completely stop chemical reactions, thereby requiring less oxygen. Thanks to this, doctors have a few extra hours to surgically handle the patient's injuries instead of just minutes. However, it is not without limitations. Another risk is that no one knows how long a patient can be frozen. Thus, after learning about this method, Shirley Uchikoshi and the girl Erica also experienced a similar case. The brains of both individuals must have temporarily been slowed down by the intake of energy as well as the necessary energy to sustain life also didn't need to be as much as before. But in reality, this artificial hibernation has only been performed for a few minutes, and no experiment has truly lasted for hours. Perhaps up to this point, we have somewhat answered the question of whether humans can hibernate. Maybe currently we still cannot artificially hibernate. But with science and modern technology developing exponentially for each era, do you believe in this in the future? In fact, this hibernation is not something no one has ever thought of. James Bedford, one of the wealthiest individuals in America during the 1960s, was a renowned psychologist at the University of California, highly respected by many students, and also a person who deeply cherished life. However, James's most extraordinary adventure truly began when his heart stopped beating. In his final days, James felt pain and regret upon realizing he had left so many things undone. He began searching everywhere for a cure, hoping to find a medical miracle. One day, while seeking a final glimmer of hope, James happened to read the book, The Prospect of Immortality. Ettinger, regarded as the father of cryonics and the founder of the Cryonics Institute, offered James a new ray of hope. The book described the possibility of preserving the body after death with the hope that one day, future science could revive and cure them. The book's content not only uplifted James but also opened an escape from his despair. He began to believe there might be a chance to live again to complete unfinished tasks. Soon after, he directly communicated with Robert Nelson, one of the 3 scientists involved in the freezing process. His belief was further strengthened by the conviction that upon awakening after 50 years, medical advancements could successfully cure his cancer. At that time, he could start a new life. To achieve this, James spent $4,200 to purchase liquid nitrogen in a cryogenic chamber. He also left the majority of his estate to cover the preservation costs for 50 years. In 1967, James took his last breath as doctors declared him deceased. And James's body freezing plan officially commenced. The doctor quickly performed artificial respiration and cardiac massage to maintain blood circulation. Subsequently, experts drained James's blood and injected dimethyl sulfoxide to protect his organs. James's body was placed in a container filled with dry ice at approximately -79°C, then transferred into a liquid nitrogen environment at -109. For the next 2 years, his remains were preserved at a facility in Phoenix, Arizona, before being moved to a new facility in California. According to Alcor's report from the only inspection on May 25, 1991, the skin on James's neck and upper body had discolored, his nose had collapsed, and 2 holes had appeared on his body. His nose and mouth showed blood stains, his eyes were slightly open, and his blood vessels were filled with. James's original plan was to be revived in 2017, but that did not come to pass. Currently, he remains nearly a preserved corpse. The reason stems from the fact that the initial body freezing process was quite rudimentary. The antifreeze dimethyl sulfoxide was once believed beneficial for long-term freezing, but is no longer used and almost certainly damaged James's brain. Although it offers only a fragile hope, the plan for human cryonic suspension, aimed at awaiting revival, continues to attract significant interest. One of the world's largest facilities offering human cryopreservation is the Life Extension Organization, Alcor in Arizona, USA. Currently, nearly 1,000 people have registered for this service. Preservation costs are $80,000 for the brain alone and $200,000 for the entire body. However, those in cryonic suspension will undoubtedly have to wait a very long time until humanity discovers a cure for cancer. Do you think humans truly have the capability to be revived using this method? But I believe that for revival to be possible, preservation technology must be sufficient until cancer treatment techniques are first discovered. Do you remember the hibernation plots for astronauts mentioned right at the beginning? So, do you know why humans considered putting astronauts into hibernation? According to NASA, the simplest and most fuel-efficient way to reach Mars would take 9 months for a one-way trip and 21 months for a round trip. A similar journey from Jupiter would take over 6 years just for a one-way trip. If a small crew of 4 people were to reach Mars, it would need 3,629 kilograms of food per year. Thus, just the return trip from Mars to Earth would consume 21,772 kilograms of food. That's not even considering the round trip. Is there any spacecraft capable of withstanding such a heavy payload? And if the payload problem is solved, what about humans wanting to travel even farther? In the future, humans might spend half their lives exploring more distant planets, even beyond the solar system. If the food issue is resolved, astronauts leaving Earth's gravitational pull will face even greater challenges. One of the main dangers is radiation. Additionally, they will encounter a series of cosmic rays that can cause genetic damage and cancer, even leading to muscle and bone loss. As studies on hibernating animals show, species like bats and hedgehogs do not experience musculoskeletal degeneration. Hibernation is the only method that could reduce negative impacts on the human body. Not to mention, long periods in space also pose psychological challenges. Prolonged space travel can lead to anxiety, worsening relationships with other crew members. Isolation from family and friends, along with a monotonous work schedule, only exacerbates these symptoms. Larger animals like polar bears entering a hibernation-like state are considered to be in torpor. So what does torpor mean? It is an unnatural hibernation state that organisms must undergo to survive in harsh environments lacking energy sources like food and water. Or you can simply understand it as a simplified version of hibernation. SpaceWorks Enterprises, an engineering company based in Atlanta, received 2 years of funding in 2016 through a NASA program. Their idea is to induce and regulate the torpor state in astronauts, using principles of therapeutic hypothermia. According to the company's president and CEO, John Bradford, therapeutic hypothermia is not as severe as in movies. You often see someone in a cryogenic state for 100 years, but you don't need to go that far. Instead, SpaceWorks proposes a method called synthetic torpor. In a theoretical mission to Mars, astronauts would undergo hibernation for up to 14 days at a time. Then be awakened, take a few days to recover, and then continue the hibernation cycle. This cycle would repeat throughout the journey. This method significantly reduces challenges because the rotating hibernation model ensures there is always an alert member during the over 200-day journey, addressing safety concerns and potential emergencies. If feasible, this would be the first step for humans to bring an entire community to the moon, not limited to just a small crew. However, as of now, hibernation remains too complex for humans to fully understand. In 2020, scientists made a significant breakthrough in hibernation research. By modulating a specialized group of cells in the brain's temperature regulation region. In the journal Nature, a study was published to examine how clusters of brain cells or neurons are linked to hibernation-like states. Scientists discovered distinct cell populations that can interconnect. Among them, a set of brain cells related to the brain's complex temperature circuit, called Q neurons, caught their attention. To test the hypothesis, researchers injected a drug into this region of genetically modified mice brains to activate the Q cells. Like flipping a switch. Immediately, this lowered the mice's body temperature from 36 degrees Celsius to as low as 22 degrees Celsius. Normally, when cooled, mice would feel cold. However, for mice in the QIS state, a body temperature of 22 degrees Celsius was a comfortable state. The mouse did not feel cold and only changed its body state. Stimulating these brain cells sent signals to other organ systems and hormones to carry out adjustments, tricking the body into an energy-saving state by reducing metabolic demands. Their heart rate and breathing slowed, and the mice were maintained in a hibernation-like state for 2 days. Some mice even maintained this state longer when the Q neurons were turned off. Sakurai's team examined the internal organs of the mice and did not detect any significant changes in the brain, heart, liver, or kidneys. Rodents do not naturally hibernate, so unlocking this potential is a leap in understanding the brain's control system. The research also highlights potential mechanisms that could lead to a hibernation-like state in Kuchikoshi's case. It is unclear how his brain was affected during the time on the mountain. But if the Q neurons were active, perhaps they triggered the body at 10 degrees Celsius, which was not truly life-threatening and even quite comfortable. However, the story of Q neurons is only part of the bigger picture. Another study by neuroscientist Sunniva Harvaden at Harvard University examined a group of neurons in a different part of the hypothalamus. When activating these cells, called a VMLPA neurons, the scientists induced a torpor state in mice. Essentially, these two studies indicate that stimulating similar brain regions is sufficient to put rodents into a deep sleep state. But the brain, with its complex circuitry and constant electrical impulses, is a chaotic world. Merely discovering cell clusters that seem to alter the body's physiological state is not enough to reliably trigger hibernation mode in humans. Therefore, more research is still needed to understand how animals enter, regulate, and survive in these states, and whether they can be safely induced in other mammals, including humans. These findings suggest the path to artificial human hibernation is fraught with challenges. However, each discovery brings us closer to the possibility of turning this dream into reality. Thus, it can be seen that if hibernation becomes a reality, it will open up a world full of potential for humanity. In that world, we could travel to distant lands, have the chance to achieve extraordinary recovery, and even the possibility of revival. Do you think in the future, humans can explore the ability to hibernate? Please leave a comment below to let DHT know. Thank you for listening, goodbye and see you again. Subscribe to the Redacted Realms channel to watch the latest videos.
If this file opened your eyes, subscribe and open the next case.